Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Rob Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. We'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Welcome to this episode of the Move Your Business Forward podcast. I am joined today by Andreas, who's an insolvency practitioner. Thank you, Andreas, for joining us today. We're start of 2024 now, if anyone's listening to this, so coming towards the end of January 24. And there's been a few things in the news that I've seen recently about a number of companies, SME companies, possibly some bigger companies as well, struggling with everything that's happened to them from, all the way back to the after effects of the pandemic, all the supply chain issues we've seen with the Ukraine war, etc. Interest rates rising and just uncertainty, a lot more continuing uncertainty. So reports of a bigger and bigger bucket of companies looking potentially to default on debt or looking to go insolvent or look at other options for restructuring. So thought it's quite timely just to have a chat to go, look, things clearly are still tough for a lot of companies and going to continue to be tough. What are the kind of things you're seeing in your profession in the insolvency world, and what would your advice be to any companies that sat there or people leading those companies sat there going, geez, this is a problem. I'm not quite sure what my options are.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of publicity over recent numbers where Begbie's, a national firm of IPs, released a press release saying that there were 50,000 companies in critical financial distress, and they define critical as being companies that are likely to go through some sort of insolvency imminently. Those figures are alarming because in 2023, 25,000 companies went into some sort of insolvency process. So, and that was a high figure. Back in pre-COVID levels, the figures in 2019, 17,000 companies went through an insolvency process. So with 50,000 companies in imminent distress, that is a very worrying. And I don't know the number, how they get those numbers, so I can't comment too much on that. Anecdotally, if you speak to insolvency practitioners, they will all tell you how busy they are, and the work for us is definitely ramping up and is reflected in those numbers. So the number of insolvencies are definitely increasing. There's a number of reasons for that. One of them is that during COVID, during lockdown, there was a lot of government help out there. There was an embargo on winding up. So in our industry, insolvencies went down significantly, and there was a downturn of about 30% in the number of companies that were falling over. So what we're seeing now post-lockdown is there's a lot of those companies that should have gone into liquidation back then are now going into liquidation now, and they have been steadily. That would have happened whatever the weather. However, as you say, with the issues with Ukraine, with the cost of living crisis, with increased interest rates, businesses out there are just getting no breaks whatsoever, and all of that is having a significant impact. People have stretched themselves, companies that have stretched themselves, they're all going to have to start repaying things. They're going to have to start repaying them at higher rates, and it's all going to start biting. And we're seeing that. And we are all, as an industry and us as a firm, just getting busier by the day.
Yeah. And say, look, thanks for sharing all of that, and it all kind of make sense. And as you say, a bunch of companies that possibly would have gone down an insolvent route anyway have managed to cling on and survive because of access to maybe other debt, or just optimistic thinking to just keep stretching, and ultimately it just got to a point where everything's kind of bubbling over. There's various things we could talk about here, but I guess what I'm interested in is what are the various options people have? And I would always suggest the earlier you start talking to people, the better, because you've probably got more options the earlier you think about this. But also, what are the things to consider? And for me, whenever I've spoken to a company that's concerned that they're potentially going in the insolvent direction, or they're running out of choices, ultimately, whoever you might owe money to is not normally in the business of trying to close a company, right? They want to get their money.
Sure.
So it's always trying to put a positive headspace on this scenario, thinking there are things you can do to negotiate. There are things you can do to limit your risk by making sure you've got things in place, but also looking at, okay, at what point is it worth almost having a bit of a reset, talking to someone like you to look at how you can actually reposition the business.
So insolvency doesn't happen overnight. So if you just consider it at a very basic level, a linear degradation of a company's balance sheet. So you're positive and then it goes through to negative. Along that line, you've got various options. And at the start of that line, when things start going down, maybe your turnover was hit, maybe your costs went up, maybe there was an event that caused an issue. Got got clients where there's been floods or whatever it is. There's lots of different reasons, but the closer you are to the beginning of the decline, the more options you have. So for someone like you, for example, you would look, companies should aim to bring someone like you on board at the start of it, where there's more scope to be able to do things, because you can fix things within the business itself. Should you let some people go? Should you stop producing a certain line of product? You start looking at the margins, what's making you money, what's not, rather than just chasing turnover and causing and having the issues just stay and get worse and worse as it goes on. As you go down that line, the less you do at that point, and if you just carry on and kind of hit and hope that things will get better, and you're constantly waiting for things to get better, but things get worse and worse, then the options in terms of what you can do become less and less. And you go from being able to do take informal business decisions at the start, to having to take formal insolvency decisions at the end. And even in that, when you get into that sphere, the earlier you come and see someone like me, for example, there are still things you can do with a fundamentally good business. So for example, a company voluntary arrangement or an administration. But the longer you wait, then you're kind of limiting yourself to effectively just killing the company off via a liquidation.
And also potentially things get more and more out of your hands as well, because if someone else is hitting the button to try and force you to pay them or whatever they need to do, you're limited again, that someone else has driven that rather than yourself. You're not in control.
Absolutely. And control is the key word. A lot of what I sell is control, and trying to keep control within directors' hands as much as they can. When you get to the point where you're getting winding up petitions by HMRC or other creditors, then you're then left to them, and it's then out of your hands. And from a human level, not being in control of effectively is your baby. SMEs, owner managed businesses, blood, sweat and tears have gone into these companies, and to then let someone else effectively pull that out your hands and take that away from you in a way that you're not able to exercise any sort of control over is it's a difficult thing. So for people to deal with.
No, for sure. So to just bringing a few things together, because you mentioned kindly someone at the beginning of a process of looking, this could talk to me. So to me, that would be either me or one of my team members, which could be a finance director, commercial director. So some people in businesses, or most people in businesses, I'm sure, are looking at all this stuff anyway, or got an eye on what's going on.
Mhm.
My perspective would always be, look, fresh pair of eyes can spot things or come up with ideas that you might not have thought of, or you're so busy kind of firefighting, you just haven't had that chance to step back and go, hang on, where are the real options to either cut back some costs or renegotiate or just do things in a bit of a smarter way. And for me, the big thing there is there's still a lot of uncertainty. There are things that businesses can't control, but there are things you can control. And the sooner you start adjusting those inputs to what's going to have make a difference, the more control you've got later on. I think the key thing there is look at what is in your control and start actioning things. Right?
And that comes down to, a lot of that comes down to systems as well there. And things are getting much better when you've got, QuickBooks, Zero, all these kind of accounting packages, that cloud-based, that is all there. And a lot of directors now have got the information at their fingertips. They can see where their turnover is. They can see where their costs are. They can see everything really quite easily. But, a lot of the companies that we have used to deal with, they'd be shocked. There's no systems, there's no controls. They don't really know. They know what's in their bank account, but that's as far as it goes. But in terms of knowing, how much a job has actually cost you, how much profit you've actually made on a specific job, people don't necessarily have that information, and that's why it's important to spend money wisely in these situations. And spending money, and I know this is your podcast and I'm not trying to advertise for you, but ultimately you or someone like you that can come into the business and set up systems so that people know what's actually going on from a financial perspective. The problems get highlighted a lot quicker, and then it's a lot easier to take decisions. But if you don't have the information, you can't make decisions, and then it then runs away from you. So you'd be shocked whenever part of my job is to prepare a statement of affairs listing the company's assets and liabilities. I've not had a director yet that hasn't been surprised with what the actual deficiency is at when we've put pen to paper and it's all in black and white. I've not had a single director that said, "Oh, that's what I expected." It's always much worse than what it is, because human instinct, you're firefighting, there's a bit of head in the sand and there's a bit of hit and hope, and it's when the proverbial hits the fan that, and you actually sit down and put everything on paper, that you realize actually what kind of position you're in. But we are seeing more and more, like I said, because more and more people are using their accounting systems better, and it's much easier, much more accessible. You can upload receipts with your phone, things like that. People are getting better at it, but there's still scope to.
Well, I think the visibility thing you mentioned there is important, isn't it? And we often talk to companies, or I talk to companies that might come to me because they've got a cash flow issue, for example, which could not be a disaster as they need to go out of business, but they've got a cash flow issue, and often don't always tell them this, but it's trying to educate that the cash flow issue doesn't just come up overnight. There's some things that have happened probably 6 months ago that have caused you a problem now. And that could be you're not winning the business you thought you were, therefore your revenue's not coming in, you're not collecting the money as quickly as you should be, or you've just got a burn rate of expenses that's more than you should have given your turnover and profit level. That later down the line is at some point going to catch up with you and cause a problem. And all the things you've said about these systems, better visibility, easier ways of capturing data quickly into an accounting system, which then means you can drive management reporting and be much more on top of things that are going in the wrong direction, from profit margin, overall profitability, and what's going on with your cash flow forecast as well. Those are all the things that I think are
definitely. Look, and directors are great. They're great at what they do. So they've become, experts at what they do, which isn't necessarily numbers, but they know the numbers. They know that if I pitch for a job at this amount, I'm going to make roughly this amount. It all comes intuitively to them, and that's why they are where they are. But as a as you get bigger, then it becomes a bit more nuanced. And when you pitch a job for 10 grand, do you actually know whether you're making any money on that job? Yep. And having the breakdown on each job, you're then, it's important chasing margin rather than chasing turnover. Lots of people chase turnover just so they can get cash in the bank, but all you're doing is banking costs later on down the line, and that's when it comes and bites you on the proverbial again. What you were just saying that.
So just thinking about anyone listening to this that might be in this position, that they are worried, they're stressed about the whole situation. I know some people I talk to, their biggest concern is they might have some debt that they feel they're going to struggle to repay, and there's some kind of personal guarantee attached to that, as well as being attached to the business. And that's obviously a big concern for people, especially if it's backs up against personal assets, house, all that kind of stuff. But realistically, you can't just expect this stuff to go away. You've got to take some advice and look for opportunities to move forward. And as I said at the beginning of this, no one is in theory trying to. No one really wants to go and repossess a house or take away assets elsewhere. They just want money repaid as agreed, and that can in some cases be renegotiated and stretched out, providing there's a clear payment plan. So often, if I'm working with a business or one of my finance directors who work in a company, will own that relationship of dealing with those stakeholders to say, look, we've looked at the business, we have had a problem, but we've looked at what we can fix, so we can now trade our way out of this. But we need to just have some payment plans in place, whether that's for HMRC, for debt, or whatever it is. Even when it comes to suppliers, suppliers ultimately want your business because that's their revenue you're attacking. So there is often room to wriggle with that kind of cash flow or payment plans. It's just trying to work everyone in that system. So your top advice, let's first talk people that might not need to come directly to you to wind up a company, but they're just trying to get their house in order. What would be your main recommendations to do?
So you just need to know where you are is the starting point. Having a picture of where your company is, whether that's with your existing accountant, financial advisor, or whether you want to bring someone else in, whatever it is, you need to know what your starting point is. As you say, if you have got loans you can't service, or you've got a big credit with one of your suppliers or something like that, then there's the informal routes of getting into payment plans with HMRC, with the bank, with a lender, with suppliers. You can do that yourself, and people will do that. The worst thing to do is bury your head in your sand, because if people don't know what's going on, then that worries them, and then you then lose goodwill, you lose credit with them, and then they'll go and speak to their solicitors and commence enforcement actions. So that's what you don't want. So everyone wants to be open, and you want good credit. When I say good credit, I mean you want goodwill with the people that you work with, because you want them to support you, but they'll only support you if you're open and honest with them. That's what you need to do initially. If things are too tough, if having looked at that, you can't do the payment plans, then that's when you need to speak to an insolvency practitioner. So whether that's me or whether that's someone that your accountant or someone you trust will recommend, then that's who you need to go to.
So what are the kind of steps that you would then go through? Let's say someone picks up the phone and they're in this position. What are the steps you would go through, and the potential options someone might have?
So it all depends. So imagine, like you said, there were significant personal guarantees on loans, and going into business would effectively, risk bankrupt. Putting a company into liquidation and calling on those loans personally would potentially cause you to go bankrupt. Then in reality, you want to keep that company alive. If that company is fundamentally good, then a CVA would probably be a good option, because that way a CVA is effectively a formal payment plan that's overseen by a supervisor, and you can continue the company trading, and you just make a monthly payment to the supervisor, who will then pay an agreed dividend to the creditors.
Yep.
At the end of it, the company's still alive, and you've managed to effectively trade out of it, but you've tied in all the creditors into a formal payment plan. They're depending on what assets there are. If there's a fundamentally a good business, administration would potentially be an option. But then if there is really nothing there and there's no better option, then we then look at liquidation. But you know, we will try and do what's best for the company, the creditors, the stakeholders, directors. You know, you look at everything and come up with a plan that's good for all involved.
And one of the things you've said there is, or before talking about those steps, and I think it's really important, is the goodwill you have with your various external stakeholders, right? The
Exactly.
more people that you can keep informed, and even if it's just keeping them updated, I think people are much more understanding if you're talking to them. What people don't want is just be ignored or promise stuff and then it never happens, right?
So perfect example is HMRC. If you've got a poor compliance history with HMRC, whether your CVA proposals are the best CVA proposals in the world, chances are they'll reject them on the basis of poor compliance history, and you've burnt your bridges with HMRC, and you might need them to vote in the CVA. So then that then puts CVA out the options box. So that's no longer an option, and you've whittled it down. So it's important, whoever it is, that you maintain that goodwill. People know it's tough out there. It's not going to come as a surprise to anyone if you pick up the phone and say, I can't afford to pay you. You know, it's not a secret. Everyone is struggling. Every industry is struggling.
And I think on the back of that, it's often, I've just talking to someone yesterday about the construction industry. You know, often the top of that chain in the developers, the build environment, they've got cash flow issues as well, right? So the knock-on impact of that is what happens. And I think there's an element of, you know, just expect that to be part of it. It is one thing, but you know, people understand these things happen. It's not necessarily in your control whatsoever. I think the other thing is, I'd encourage any companies is, you know, just be so much more on top of who you're working with and understand their track record, you know, the goodwill you've got with them, and understanding of how they're likely to be as a player, and, you know, who's actually funding them as well. You know, there's a lot of companies that, you know, have funding from various sources. When that starts to dry up or slows down, the knock-on impact is huge. And
definitely. I mean, construction is brutal. We deal with so many people that they're acting as a subcontractor to a main contractor, and main contractor says, I'm not paying this, and they're left stuck. No money to there's no money to kind of trade. There's no money to pay lawyers. There's no money to kind of keep afloat, and it's out. And you know, that's a brutal industry, and people have been burnt significantly, and we've seen them. So you know, I think, like I say, it's a very human. We deal with humans. People come and see us. When they first come to see me, they're, you know, they've been through the mill. They've been firefighting. They've been working all the hours God sends. They've been remortgaging their houses. That, you know, the relationships have suffered. They've all gone. You know, people have gone through really difficult period, and then they come and see me, of all people, and they think the worst. But then once we kind of lay it all out, go through it, formulate a plan, realize that actually they're not going to lose their house, and you know, it's not as bad as you thought it was in your head. Everyone who then leaves says goodbye to me. They're in a much better place.
You've taken a lot of weight off when they've got that plan. I think one of the key things there is, if you are that business leader, entrepreneur, and you've got yourself into this situation, the amount of headspace, the stress of all of this takes up is stopping you actually doing what you should be doing, which is trying to trying to win that and bit of new business, try and trade your way out of this. And I think that's it. The sooner you can get someone that's going to help get on your side, get behind you with a plan to move forward, frees up your headspace to focus on, right, we've got a plan. I just need to do my part of that, which could be making some decisions about cutting costs. It could be just getting out there and pushing to win the business that you need to make things happen, right?
Spot on.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're spending your whole time firefighting, then how are you getting on with your marketing plan? How are you getting on with your sales? How are you getting on with, treating your staff well? All the aspects of the business that are you not being looked at whilst you're firefighting, and then expecting the business to kind of turn around. It's no one's got that level of bandwidth.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, look, we're coming to the end of this. Any final tip, Andreas, you'd give to someone listening to this? I can guess what it is. Just pick up, have a conversation.
Nothing more than what we've said. But if you speak to any insolvency practitioner or any professional, speak to someone early, and whether that's a mate or whether it's a professional, speak to someone. You're not on your own. There's plenty of help out there, and things aren't as bad as what you think they are.
Yeah. One thing I'll add to that, because I've had a number of conversations with you about particular businesses over time. And I think if someone's going to go and talk to an insolvency person, talk to a couple of people and make an opinion of actually who you think you're going to be able to work with the best. Because I think there is different approaches to things, and I think I've always appreciated your approach of, look, let's just stand back, look at all the options and make sense of it. Other people can be a little bit early to go, right, let's just wrap this thing up and move on. So hang on, you've got to make sure you're getting advice that you trust and believe in, and maybe compare a couple of people as well, like with any service you're looking for, right?
Absolutely. I think you should get, and if a business is your baby, you're an insolvency practitioner, you're kind of entrusting them with that. So you do need to be able to work with them. You do need to be able to trust them. So definitely get a second opinion. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And most IPs will happily give you an hour of their time to talk through your situation.
Yeah, no, perfect. Andreas, thanks very much. Enjoyed talking to you about this, and thank you for joining me on it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.